There's a prison most people live in that has no walls, no bars, no guards, just thoughts. Endless, relentless, exhausting thoughts. Thoughts about what you said yesterday. Thoughts about what might happen tomorrow. Thoughts about what people think of you. Thoughts about decisions you need to make. Thoughts about conversations that haven't happened yet. Thoughts about mistakes from 5 years ago. Your mind never stops. It analyzes. It predicts. It rehearses. It replays. And somewhere along the way, thinking stopped being a tool and became a trap. You're not using your mind anymore. Your mind is using you. Overthinking is the silent epidemic of our time. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It just quietly steals your peace. One thought at a time. You lie awake at 3 a.m, replaying a conversation from work. You spend hours deciding between two options that probably don't even matter. You create entire scenarios in your head about what might go wrong, and then you suffer through them as if they're real. You're not living in the present. You're living in your head. And your head is a terrible place to live. Because the mind, when left unchecked, becomes a factory of worry. It produces anxiety faster than you can process it. It creates problems that don't exist and solves them in ways that don't work. It tells you stories about yourself that aren't true. And you believe them. Because you've been listening to that voice for so long, you think it is you. But it's not. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that observes them. And that distinction changes everything. Because once you realize you're not your mind, you can finally step back from it. You can watch the thoughts without being consumed by them. You can hear the voice without obeying it. You can experience the anxiety without becoming it. That's freedom. Not the absence of thoughts, but the space between you and them. Most people never find that space. They're so identified with their thoughts that they can't separate themselves from the noise. When the mind says, "You're not good enough," they believe it. When the mind says, "This will go wrong," they panic. When the mind says, "Everyone is judging you," they retreat. They take every thought as truth, every worry as prophecy, every fear as fact, and they live accordingly, small, careful, exhausted. But what if the thoughts aren't true? What if most of what your mind tells you is just noise, old programming, defense mechanisms, evolutionary glitches designed for a world that no longer exists? Your brain was wired to keep you alive in the wild, to scan for threats, to predict danger, to remember every mistake so you wouldn't repeat it. That was useful when survival meant avoiding predators. But now your brain treats a difficult email like a life or death situation. It treats social rejection like physical danger. It treats uncertainty like a threat. And it responds accordingly, with anxiety, with overthinking, with constant vigilance, because it's trying to protect you, but it's destroying your peace in the process. This audiobook is about breaking free from that cycle. It's about understanding why you overthink, how it's robbing you of the present moment, and most importantly, how to stop. Not by forcing your mind to be quiet, but by changing your relationship with it. You'll learn why the mind creates anxiety and how to interrupt that pattern. You'll discover the difference between productive thinking and destructive rumination. You'll understand the cost of living in your head and the freedom that comes from returning to your body, to your breath, to the present moment. You'll see that peace isn't something you find when your mind finally shuts up. It's something you access when you stop listening to every thought as if it's the voice of truth. By the end of this audiobook, you'll know how to catch yourself mid-spiral, how to redirect your mind when it starts down familiar paths of worry, how to create space between stimulus and response, how to think when thinking serves you and rest when it doesn't. Because the goal isn't to stop thinking, it's to stop being tyrannized by thought, to reclaim your mind as a tool, not a prison, to live in presence, not in the endless loop of what ifs and should haves. So take a breath. Notice that you're here, right now, in this moment, not in yesterday, not in tomorrow. Here. That's where peace lives. Not in the resolution of every problem, not in the perfect thought, but in the simple, profound act of being present. Let's begin. Not by thinking about peace, but by experiencing it, one conscious breath at a time. Chapter 1. The Anatomy of Overthinking. Overthinking doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with sirens and flashing lights. It creeps in quietly, disguised as preparation, as analysis, as caring. You tell yourself you're just being thorough, just thinking things through, just making sure you don't make a mistake. But hours pass, and you're still thinking. Days pass, and you're still stuck. Months pass, and you realize you haven't actually moved forward. You've just been circling the same thoughts, wearing grooves into your mind, like a record that skips in the same place over and over again. That's overthinking. Not the act of thinking deeply, but the compulsion to think endlessly without resolution. There's a difference between thinking and overthinking. Thinking is productive. It has a purpose. It analyzes a problem, generates solutions, makes a decision, and then moves on. It's a tool you pick up when you need it and put down when you're done. Overthinking is the opposite. It's thinking without purpose. It's analysis that leads nowhere. It's questions that have no answers. It's the mind spinning its wheels, burning energy, going nowhere. You're thinking, but you're not solving. You're processing, but you're not progressing. You're engaged, but you're not moving forward. And the longer you stay in that loop, the more exhausted you become. Overthinking has patterns, recognizable cycles that repeat across different situations. The first pattern is rumination. That's when your mind takes an event from the past and plays it on repeat. You said something awkward at a party 3 weeks ago, and you're still thinking about it. You had a disagreement with a friend last month, and you're still replaying what you should have said. You made a mistake at work last year, and you're still analyzing what went wrong. The past is over, but in your mind, it's still happening. You're living there, trying to change something that can't be changed, trying to fix something that's already done. And every replay deepens the groove, makes it easier for your mind to return there, until the memory becomes a monument, a place you visit daily, even though it offers nothing but pain. The second pattern is catastrophizing. That's when your mind takes a possibility and turns it into a certainty. You feel a pain in your chest and immediately think it's a heart attack. You don't hear back from someone and assume they're angry. You make one mistake and predict total failure. Your mind doesn't just consider what might go wrong. It jumps to the worst possible outcome and treats it as inevitable. And then it builds an entire narrative around that outcome. What will happen next? How you'll feel? What people will think? How your life will fall apart? None of it has happened. But in your mind, it's already real, and you're already suffering through it. The third pattern is analysis paralysis. That's when you have a decision to make, and instead of making it, you analyze every possible angle. You list the pros and cons. You seek advice from everyone. You research. You compare. You imagine every outcome, but you never decide, because the more you think, the less clear it becomes. Every option seems to have risks. Every choice seems wrong, so you stay stuck, frozen between possibilities. And while you're overthinking, life moves on without you. Opportunities pass. Time slips away. And the decision that could have been made in 5 minutes takes 5 months. Not because it's complicated, but because you've made it complicated. The fourth pattern is anticipatory anxiety. That's when your mind lives in the future, rehearsing scenarios that haven't happened yet. You have a meeting next week, and you're already playing out every way it could go wrong. You have a conversation you need to have, and you're already scripting both sides. You're preparing for outcomes that may never occur, and in doing so, you're living through them prematurely. You're feeling the stress of the future in the present, and when the actual moment arrives, you're already exhausted. You've lived it a dozen times in your head. None of those rehearsals helped. They just drained you. So why does the mind do this? Why does it overthink when overthinking clearly doesn't help? Because the mind mistakes activity for progress. It believes that if it's thinking, it's doing something. It's solving. It's preparing. It's protecting you. The mind doesn't understand that sometimes thinking makes things worse. That sometimes the solution isn't more analysis, but less. That sometimes the way forward isn't through thought, but through action, or through rest. The mind only knows one mode: think. So it thinks, and thinks, and thinks, until you're so lost in your head that you forget there's a world outside of it. Overthinking is also a form of control. When life feels uncertain, the mind tries to create certainty through thought. It analyzes every variable, trying to predict every outcome, believing that if it can just think through every possibility, it can avoid pain. But life isn't controllable through thought. You can't think your way into certainty. You can't predict your way into safety. The more you try, the more anxious you become. Because deep down, you know you can't control everything. But your mind keeps trying anyway. And that effort, that constant trying, is what exhausts you. Let me tell you about a woman named Rachel. Rachel was a chronic overthinker. Every decision, big or small, became an ordeal. What to order at a restaurant, what to wear to work, whether to text someone back. Each choice spiraled into analysis. She'd weigh options endlessly, imagine every consequence, seek reassurance from friends. And by the time she made a decision, she was exhausted. Not because the decisions were hard, but because she made them hard. Her mind turned every choice into a crisis, every possibility into a problem. And she lived in a constant state of mental fatigue. Not from doing too much, but from thinking too much. One day, her therapist asked her a question. What are you afraid will happen if you make the wrong choice? Rachel paused. She'd never thought about it that way. And slowly, the answer emerged. I'm afraid I'll regret it. I'm afraid people will judge me. I'm afraid I'll mess up my life. Her therapist nodded. And do you think thinking more will prevent that? Rachel wanted to say yes, but she couldn't, because she realized that all her overthinking had never prevented regret. It had never stopped judgment. It had never guaranteed the right outcome. It had only guaranteed exhaustion. That realization was the beginning of her freedom. Because she saw that overthinking wasn't protecting her, it was paralyzing her. The anatomy of overthinking reveals this truth. It's not a thinking problem. It's a trust problem. You don't trust yourself to handle uncertainty. You don't trust that you'll be okay if things go wrong. You don't trust life to unfold without your constant mental management. So you think, and think, and think, trying to create through thought what can only be found through trust. And the irony is, the more you overthink, the less you trust yourself. Because overthinking trains your brain to doubt, to second guess, to question, until doubt becomes your default. And confidence, that quiet knowing that you'll figure it out, fades away. Breaking free from overthinking begins with recognizing it. You can't change what you don't see. So start noticing when you're in the loop, when your thoughts start circling, when you're replaying the past or rehearsing the future, when you're analyzing without progressing. Just notice. That's the first step. Because the moment you notice, you create space. You step back from the thought just enough to see it. And in that seeing, the grip loosens. You're no longer inside the thought. You're observing it. And observation changes everything. Let's continue. Chapter 2. The cost of living in your head. There's a life happening right now. Real. Present. Full of moments that will never come again. But you're not in it. You're in your head. Thinking about what happened yesterday. Worrying about what might happen tomorrow. Analyzing what someone meant by what they said. Rehearsing what you'll say next time. Planning. Predicting. Protecting. And while you're doing all of that, life is passing you by. The sunset you didn't see because you were thinking. The conversation you didn't fully hear because you were replaying another one in your mind. The meal you didn't taste because you were worrying about work. The hug you didn't feel because you were somewhere else entirely. This is the cost of overthinking. Not just the anxiety, not just the exhaustion, but the life you miss while you're living in your head. Most people don't realize how much they're missing. They're so used to being in their thoughts that they think that's normal. They think everyone lives this way, distracted, half present, mentally somewhere else. But it's not normal. It's learned. It's a habit. And like any habit, it can be unlearned. But first, you have to see the cost. You have to recognize what you're losing by spending so much time in your mind. Because the cost isn't theoretical. It's real. It's measurable. It's your life. When you're overthinking, you're not present. And when you're not present, you're not alive. Not fully. You're existing. Going through the motions. But you're not experiencing. You're not feeling. You're not connecting. You're just thinking. Let's start with relationships. Overthinking destroys connection because connection requires presence. It requires you to be here with this person in this moment. But when you're overthinking, you're not here. You're in your head, analyzing what they said, interpreting their tone, wondering what they think of you. You're having a conversation with someone, but you're not really listening. You're thinking about what you'll say next, or replaying what you said before, or worrying that you said something wrong. And the person in front of you, they feel it. They feel your absence. They sense that you're not fully there. And connection, real connection, is impossible without presence. Overthinking also creates misunderstandings. Because when you're in your head, you're not hearing what's actually being said. You're hearing what you think is being said. You're interpreting through the filter of your anxiety, your insecurities, your past experiences. Someone says something neutral, and you hear criticism. Someone is quiet, and you assume they're angry. Someone doesn't text back immediately, and you create an entire story about what that means. None of it is real. It's all in your head, but it affects your behavior. You respond to the story, not the reality, and that creates conflict, confusion, distance, all because you couldn't stay out of your own head long enough to see what was actually happening. Then there's the cost to your body. Overthinking isn't just mental, it's physical. When your mind is in overdrive, your body responds. Your heart rate increases. Your muscles tense. Your breathing becomes shallow. Stress hormones flood your system. And if this is happening constantly, day after day, your body never gets a break. You're in a perpetual state of low-level stress. And over time, that takes a toll. Chronic headaches, digestive issues, insomnia, fatigue. Your body is designed to handle stress in short bursts, fight or flight, respond to the threat, then rest. But overthinking keeps the stress response active. There's no threat, but your body doesn't know that. It's responding to your thoughts as if they're real dangers, and it's exhausting. Sleep is one of the first casualties, because overthinking doesn't stop when the sun goes down. You lie in bed, and your mind starts running, replaying the day, planning tomorrow, worrying about things you can't control. And the more you try to sleep, the more awake you become. Because you're fighting your mind, trying to force it to be quiet. But fighting creates tension, and tension keeps you awake. So you lie there, exhausted but unable to rest. And the next day, you're tired, mentally foggy, emotionally fragile, and more prone to overthinking. Because a tired mind is an anxious mind. It's a vicious cycle. Overthinking steals your sleep. Lack of sleep makes you overthink more. And the spiral continues. Overthinking also robs you of joy. Because joy lives in the present moment. It's in the laugh you share with a friend, the taste of good food, the warmth of sunlight, the sound of music. These moments are simple, immediate, but you can't experience them if you're in your head. If you're thinking about what you need to do later, if you're worrying about what someone thinks, if you're replaying a mistake, joy doesn't wait for you to finish thinking. It happens now. And if you're not here now, you miss it. You'll look back and realize you spent years in your head, missing the life that was happening around you. Let me tell you about a man named Daniel. Daniel was a planner. He thought about everything in advance, every trip, every conversation, every possible outcome. He thought this made him prepared, responsible, in control. But what it actually did was keep him from enjoying anything. He'd go on vacation and spend the entire time thinking about work. He'd be at dinner with friends and think about the presentation he had next week. He'd be with his kids and think about bills. He was always somewhere else. And one day, his daughter said something that broke his heart. She said, "Dad, you're here, but you're not really here." She was 8 years old, and she could already see what Daniel had been blind to. He was missing her childhood, not because he wasn't there, but because he wasn't present. That moment changed him, because he realized the cost wasn't abstract. It was his relationship with his daughter. It was the moments he'd never get back. It was the life he was too busy thinking about to actually live. So he made a choice. He started practicing presence. Not perfectly, not all at once, but little by little. He'd catch himself drifting into thought and bring himself back to the moment, to his daughter's face, to the sound of her laugh, to the feeling of her hand in his. And slowly, He learned to live outside his head, and his daughter felt it. She said, "Dad, you're different now. You're really here." And he was. Finally, the cost of overthinking is presence, and presence is everything. It's the only place where life actually happens. The past is memory. The future is imagination. The present is reality. And if you're never in the present, you're never in reality. You're living in a mental simulation, a world of thoughts. And thoughts, no matter how vivid, are not life. They're representations of life, shadows of life, but not life itself. Life is what's happening right now. While you're reading this, while you're breathing, while your heart is beating, that's life. And it's the only life you have. So the question is, how much of it do you want to spend in your head? Overthinking also costs you opportunities, because opportunities require action. And when you're overthinking, you're not acting. You're analyzing, considering, weighing. And while you're doing that, the opportunity passes. Someone else takes it. The moment closes, and you're left with regret. Not because you made the wrong choice, but because you never made one. You let overthinking steal your chance. This happens in careers, in relationships, in life. The job you didn't apply for because you overthought whether you were qualified. The person you didn't talk to because you overthought what to say. The trip you didn't take because you overthought what could go wrong. All the things you wanted but didn't pursue because your mind convinced you to wait, to think more, to be sure. And certainty never came. So neither did the life you wanted. The cost of living in your head is living a half life. It's going through the motions but not feeling them. It's being surrounded by people but feeling alone. It's having time but never enough. It's wanting peace but never finding it. Because peace isn't in your thoughts. It's in the space between them. And if you never leave your head, you never find that space. You're trapped in a prison of your own making. A prison with no walls, just thoughts. Endless, exhausting, consuming thoughts. And the key to that prison? Presence. The simple act of being here, now, fully, without the filter of thought. That's freedom. That's life. And it's available to you in every moment. If you just stop thinking long enough to experience it, let's move forward. Chapter 3. Why your brain won't shut up. If overthinking is so exhausting, so unproductive, so clearly harmful, why can't you just stop? Why does your brain keep doing it even when you know it doesn't help? The answer isn't laziness or lack of willpower. It's biology. Your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. The problem is, it was designed for a world that no longer exists. Your brain evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to keep you alive in environments where threats were real and immediate. Predators, starvation, rival tribes. In that world, the brain that survived was the brain that constantly scanned for danger. That remembered every mistake. That anticipated every threat. That never stopped thinking about what could go wrong. Because in that world, stopping meant dying. But we don't live in that world anymore. The threats we face today are different. They're not physical. They're psychological, social, financial. But your brain doesn't know the difference. To your ancient brain, a difficult conversation feels like a predator. Social rejection feels like being expelled from the tribe, which meant certain death. Uncertainty feels like being lost in the wilderness. And it responds the same way it always has, by thinking, by analyzing, by trying to predict and prepare, by staying vigilant, by never, ever relaxing. Because relaxing, to your primitive brain, means vulnerability, and vulnerability means danger. This is why you can't just think positive thoughts and make the overthinking stop. Because it's not about the content of your thoughts. It's about the mechanism producing them. Your brain has a negativity bias. It's wired to pay more attention to threats than to opportunities, to remember failures more than successes, to anticipate problems more than possibilities. This isn't a flaw, it's a feature. Because in the ancestral environment, the cost of missing a threat was death. But the cost of missing an opportunity was just a missed meal. So the brain that survived was the one that erred on the side of caution, that saw danger everywhere, even when it wasn't there. That's why your mind goes to the worst-case scenario. It's not being pessimistic. It's being protective. It's trying to keep you safe by preparing you for every possible danger. But in doing so, it creates anxiety, because most of the dangers it's preparing you for don't exist. They're hypothetical, imaginary, statistically unlikely, but your brain treats them as real, and you feel the stress of threats that haven't happened and probably never will. This is the paradox of the modern brain. The very mechanism that kept your ancestors alive is now the source of your suffering, because it's overactive, overly sensitive, responding to stimuli that aren't actually dangerous. There's another reason your brain won't shut up. It's addicted to solving problems. The human brain is a problem-solving machine. That's what made us successful as a species. We figured out how to make tools, build shelters, grow food, solve challenges, and the brain rewards problem-solving with dopamine, that feel-good chemical that says, yes, this is productive, keep going. But here's the issue. In the modern world, most of your problems can't be solved through thinking. They're not practical problems. They're emotional, relational, existential. But your brain doesn't know that. It keeps trying to solve them the only way it knows how, by thinking. And every time it thinks about the problem, it gets a little hit of dopamine. Not because it solved anything, but because it's engaged in the process. So it keeps thinking, and thinking, and thinking. Not because it's helping, but because it feels like it is. This is why overthinking is so addictive. It's not pleasurable, but it's compelling. Your brain keeps pulling you back into thought because it mistakes activity for progress. It believes that as long as you're thinking, you're doing something useful, even when you're not, even when you're just spinning in circles. The brain can't tell the difference between productive thinking and rumination. To the brain, thinking is thinking, and thinking feels like trying. So it keeps going. Let me give you an example. You have a conversation that doesn't go well. Maybe someone seemed upset. Maybe there was tension. Your brain immediately starts analyzing. What did I say? What did they mean? Are they angry? Should I reach out? What if I made it worse? And on and on. Your brain is trying to solve the problem. But there's no problem to solve in your head. The problem, if there is one, exists between you and the other person. And it can only be addressed through action, through conversation. But your brain doesn't want action. It wants more thinking, because thinking feels safe. Action feels risky. So you stay in your head, thinking, solving nothing. There's also the illusion of control. When life feels uncertain, thinking gives you the illusion that you're doing something about it. You can't control what's going to happen, but you can think about it. You can plan, prepare, predict, and that feels like control. It's not real control. but it's enough to quiet the anxiety temporarily until the thoughts spiral again. And then you're back in your head, trying to think your way to certainty. But certainty doesn't come from thought. It comes from acceptance, from trusting that you'll handle whatever comes. But your brain doesn't trust that. So it keeps thinking, keeps trying, keeps searching for the answer that will finally make everything okay. And the answer never comes, because the question itself is unanswerable. You can't think your way into a guaranteed future. You can only live your way through an uncertain one. Your brain also won't shut up, because it's been trained not to. Every time you've responded to overthinking by thinking more, you've reinforced the pattern. You've taught your brain that thinking is the solution, so it keeps offering you thoughts. Every time you've lain awake at night, replaying scenarios, your brain learned that nighttime is thinking time. Every time you've avoided action by analyzing, your brain learned that analysis is safer than action. You've trained it, unintentionally, to keep you in your head. And now it's a habit, an automatic response. Something that happens without conscious choice. That's why you can't just decide to stop overthinking. Because it's not a decision. It's a pattern. And patterns have to be interrupted, not willed away. But here's the good news. If your brain learned to overthink, it can learn to stop. Neural pathways are not permanent. They're plastic, changeable. Every time you catch yourself overthinking and choose to redirect your attention, you weaken the old pathway and strengthen a new one. It's not instant. It takes repetition, but it works. Because the brain adapts to what you practice. If you practice overthinking, you get better at overthinking. If you practice presence, you get better at presence. It's that simple. Not easy, but simple. The first step is understanding that your brain isn't broken. It's not malfunctioning. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. It's just doing it in a context where that design no longer serves you. And once you understand that, you can start working with your brain instead of against it. You can learn to recognize the patterns, to interrupt them, to redirect, to train a new response. And slowly, the overthinking loses its grip. Not because your brain changed overnight, but because you changed how you relate to it. Let's continue. Chapter 4. The difference between thinking and ruminating. Not all thinking is overthinking. There's a difference between using your mind as a tool and being used by it. Between thinking with purpose and thinking out of habit. Between problem solving and problem dwelling. And if you can learn to recognize that difference, you can reclaim your mental energy. You can think when thinking serves you and rest when it doesn't. Because the goal isn't to stop thinking. It's to stop being controlled by thought. Thinking is productive. It has direction. It starts with a question or a problem, engages in analysis, generates solutions, and reaches a conclusion. Then it stops. You think about a project at work, map out the steps, make a decision, and move forward. You think about a difficult conversation, clarify what you want to say, and then have the conversation. Thinking moves you from uncertainty to clarity, from confusion to understanding. It's temporary, focused, useful. Rumination is the opposite. It's thinking without direction. It circles the same thoughts endlessly without reaching any conclusion. You think about the same problem over and over, but you never solve it. You replay the same conversation, but you never gain new insight. You worry about the same outcome, but you never take action. Rumination is thinking that goes nowhere. It's mental spinning. And the more you do it, the deeper the groove becomes, until those thoughts become automatic. A loop that plays in the background of your life, draining energy, creating anxiety, offering nothing in return. The key difference is this: thinking has an endpoint. Rumination doesn't. Thinking resolves. Rumination repeats. Thinking leads to action. Rumination leads to paralysis. Thinking serves you. Rumination sabotages you. So how do you know which one you're doing? Ask yourself, is this thought moving me forward? Is it giving me new information, or just recycling old fears? Am I solving something, or just suffering through it? If the thought is productive, if it's leading somewhere, it's thinking. If it's repetitive, if it's familiar, if it's going in circles, it's rumination. And once you recognize rumination, you can interrupt it. Because rumination thrives in unconsciousness. The moment you see it, it loses some of its power. You realize you're not discovering anything new. You're just replaying an old recording. And once you see that, you can choose to turn it off. Let me tell you about a woman named Leah. She had a pattern. Whenever something went wrong, she'd spend days, sometimes weeks, thinking about it. If a project at work didn't go well, she'd replay every meeting, every decision, every moment, looking for where it went wrong. She told herself she was learning from her mistakes, but she wasn't learning. She was punishing herself. She'd go over the same details again and again, imagining what she could have done differently, feeling the shame as if it were happening in real time. And all that replaying, it never changed the outcome. It never gave her a new strategy. It just kept her stuck in the past. That's rumination. One day, her mentor asked her a simple question. "What do you gain from thinking about this?" Leah paused. She wanted to say, "I'm learning." But she realized she wasn't. She'd already identified the mistake. She knew what to do differently next time. The thinking wasn't serving any purpose except to make her feel bad. Her mentor nodded. "So you're not thinking. You're ruminating. And rumination is just self-inflicted suffering." That distinction changed everything for Leah, because she realized she could stop, not because the mistake didn't matter, but because continuing to think about it wasn't helping. She'd learned the lesson. Now, she just needed to move on. Here's a practice that helps. When you notice your mind circling the same thoughts, stop and ask, what would I need to know or do to stop thinking about this? Sometimes the answer is action. You need to have a conversation, make a decision, apologize, fix something. And once you identify the action, you take it. And the thinking stops, because you've resolved the loop. But sometimes the answer is acceptance. There's nothing to do. The situation is over. The outcome is final. And in that case, the only action is to release it. To say, "I've thought about this enough. I'm choosing to move on." And then you redirect your attention, not by suppressing the thought, but by consciously choosing to focus elsewhere. On your breath, on the present moment, on something you can actually influence. Another distinction: thinking seeks solutions. Rumination seeks certainty. When you're thinking, you're trying to figure something out. When you're ruminating, you're trying to feel certain about something that's uncertain. And since certainty is impossible in most situations, rumination never ends. It keeps searching for the guarantee that doesn't exist, the reassurance that won't come, the answer that will finally make you feel okay. But that answer doesn't exist. So the rumination continues, endlessly, hopelessly. This is especially common with decisions. You need to make a choice, but you're afraid of making the wrong one. So you analyze every option, seek advice from everyone, list pros and cons, imagine every outcome. But no amount of thinking will give you certainty. There's always risk, always the possibility of regret. And the more you think, the less clear it becomes. Because you're not looking for a decision anymore. You're looking for a guarantee. And life doesn't offer those. The way out is to accept uncertainty, to realize that you'll never have all the information. You'll never know for sure. And that's okay. You make the best decision you can with what you know. And then you trust yourself to handle whatever comes. That's thinking. But trying to think your way to certainty, that's rumination. And it will trap you forever. Rumination also feeds on itself. The more you ruminate, the more anxious you become. And the more anxious you become, the more you ruminate. Because anxiety creates the feeling that something's wrong. And when something feels wrong, your brain tries to fix it by thinking. But the thinking doesn't fix the anxiety. It intensifies it because you're giving your mind more material to worry about, more scenarios to imagine, more problems to anticipate. So the anxiety grows, and the rumination grows with it, until you're trapped in a cycle where thought creates anxiety, and anxiety creates more thought. Breaking this cycle requires interrupting it physically, because rumination lives in the mind, and the mind responds to the body. When you notice rumination starting, move, stand up, walk, stretch, change your environment. Physical movement interrupts mental patterns. It brings you back into your body, which is always in the present moment. Your body isn't ruminating about the past or worrying about the future. It's here, now, feeling, sensing, breathing. And when you return your attention to your body, the rumination loses its hold. You're no longer feeding it with attention. You're redirecting that attention to something real, something immediate, something physical. Here's the truth. Your mind will always generate thoughts. That's its job. But you don't have to engage with every thought. You don't have to follow every worry down the rabbit hole. You can observe the thought without obeying it. You can notice the worry without worrying. That's the skill. Not thought suppression, thought observation. You see the rumination starting, and instead of diving in, you stay on the surface. You watch it like a cloud passing by. Interesting. There's that familiar thought again. And then you let it pass. Because thoughts, when not fed with attention, don't stick around. They move through. But when you engage them, when you argue with them, or try to solve them, you give them power. You make them real, and they stay. The difference between thinking and ruminating is the difference between using a map and wandering in circles. One gets you somewhere. The other just exhausts you. And once you learn to recognize which one you're doing, you can choose differently. You can think when it serves you and stop when it doesn't. You can use your mind without being used by it. And that's freedom. Not the absence of thought, but the presence of choice. Let's move forward. Chapter 5. The present moment is the only moment. There's only one place where life actually exists. Not in the past, not in the future, but here, right now, in this exact moment, this breath, this heartbeat, this word you're hearing. Everything else is memory or imagination. The past is gone. It exists only as a thought in your mind. The future hasn't happened yet. It exists only as a projection, a story you tell yourself about what might be. but neither is real. Neither is happening. The only thing that's actually happening is now, this moment. And yet, this is the one place most people never are. They're in their heads, living in every moment except the present one, replaying yesterday, rehearsing tomorrow, and missing today entirely. Overthinking is a time travel problem. Your mind is always trying to go backwards or forwards. Backwards to fix what can't be fixed. Forwards to control what can't be controlled. And in doing so, it misses the only moment that's real. The only moment where life is actually happening. The only moment where you have any power. Because you can't change the past. You can't control the future. But you can be present now. And presence, full presence, is where peace lives. Not in resolution, not in certainty, but in the simple act of being here, fully, without resistance, without distraction, without the mental commentary that narrates everything. Most people think they're present when they're not. They're physically here, but mentally elsewhere. They're in a conversation, but thinking about what they'll say next. They're eating, but not tasting. They're walking, but not feeling. They're alive, but not awake. Because presence isn't about location. It's about attention. It's about where your mind is. And if your mind is in the past or future, you're not present. You're absent. And absence, even when you're physically here, is a form of loss. You're losing the moment. The only moment you have. The only moment you'll ever have. The present moment is where everything you've been searching for already exists. Peace, clarity, aliveness. You don't find these things by thinking about them. You find them by being here, now, without the filter of thought, without the need to change or fix or improve anything. Just being, experiencing, feeling. This moment, exactly as it is, contains everything you need. Not everything you want, but everything you need. Your breath, your heartbeat, your awareness. That's enough. That's everything. But your mind doesn't think so. It says this moment isn't enough. It says you need to be somewhere else, doing something else, being someone else. It says the present moment is just a stepping stone to a better future moment. But that's a lie. The future moment, when it arrives, will be another present moment. And if you're not present in this one, you won't be present in that one either. You'll just keep waiting. Waiting for the moment when life finally begins. But life is beginning right now and ending right now. And if you're not here to experience it, you miss it. Let me tell you about a man named Eric. Eric spent his entire life waiting to finish school so he could get a job, waiting to get the job so he could make money, waiting to make money so he could save, waiting to save so he could retire, waiting to retire so he could finally relax. He spent 65 years waiting for his life to begin. And when he finally retired, when he finally had the time he'd been waiting for, he realized something devastating. He'd missed it. All of it. The years with his wife, the childhood of his kids, the moments of joy that had been available all along. He'd been so focused on the future that he'd sleepwalked through the present. And now, looking back, it felt like a blur. A series of goals achieved and moments missed. He had time now, but he couldn't get back the time he'd lost because he'd never been present to experience it. That's the tragedy of living in your head. You spend your life waiting for the moment when everything aligns, when everything is perfect, when you finally have permission to be present. But that moment never comes because there's always something else. Another goal, another worry, another problem. The mind will always find a reason to be somewhere other than here. That's its nature. But presence is a choice. You don't wait for the perfect moment to be present. You choose to be present in whatever moment you're in, difficult or easy, joyful or painful, perfect or imperfect. Presence doesn't require ideal circumstances. It just requires attention, the willingness to be here, fully, without the need for things to be different than they are. Here's a practice. Right now, as you're experiencing this, notice where your attention is. Are you fully here, listening, or are you partially somewhere else? Thinking about what you need to do later? Replaying something from earlier? If you notice you're not fully present, that's okay. Just bring your attention back to your breath, to the sensation of your body, to the sound of these words. That's presence. It's not a permanent state. It's a continuous return. You drift into thought. You notice. You return. You drift again. You notice. You return. That's the practice, not perfection. Just return. Presence is also the antidote to anxiety, because anxiety lives in the future. It's the fear of what might happen. But when you're fully present, there's no anxiety. There's just this breath, this moment. And in this moment, usually, you're okay. The crisis you're worried about hasn't happened. The disaster you're imagining isn't real. Right now, in this exact second, you're safe. You're breathing. You're here. And that's enough. Anxiety dissolves in the present moment. Not because the future becomes certain, but because the present becomes real. And the present, when experienced fully, is almost always manageable. The same is true for regret. Regret lives in the past. It's the pain of what was or wasn't. But when you're fully present, there's no regret. There's just this moment, which has nothing to do with what happened before. The past is over, and you can't change it by thinking about it. You can only miss the present by dwelling on it. So you let it go, not by forgetting, but by choosing to be here instead of there, by choosing presence over replay. Presence is also where connection happens. You can't connect with someone if you're not present with them. You can't truly listen if you're thinking about your response. You can't truly see someone if you're distracted by your thoughts. Connection requires presence. It requires you to be here, with this person, in this moment, fully. And when you are, something magical happens. You feel them. They feel you. There's no barrier, no performance, just presence. And in that presence, connection deepens. Not through words, but through being. Most people are so used to living in their heads that presence feels strange at first. It feels slow, quiet, almost boring, because there's no drama, no narrative, no story, just experience, just sensation, just being. But once you acclimate, once you remember what it feels like to be fully alive in the moment, you realize this is what you've been missing. This is what all the thinking was trying to achieve. Peace, aliveness, connection. And it was here all along, not in the resolution of your thoughts, but in the release of them, in the return to now. The present moment is not a concept, it's an experience. And you can only access it by leaving your head and entering your body, by feeling instead of thinking, by sensing instead of analyzing, by being instead of doing. That's the shift. From the mind to the moment, from thought to presence, from absence to aliveness. And once you make that shift, everything changes. Not because your circumstances change, but because you change. You're finally here, finally awake, finally alive. And life, it turns out, has been waiting for you all along, right here, in this moment. Let's continue. Chapter 6. Breaking the spiral before it starts. There's a moment, a split second, between the trigger and the spiral, between the thought arriving and you diving into it, between the worry appearing and the overthinking taking over. Most people miss that moment. They're so used to the pattern that they don't see the gap. The thought appears, and instantly they're inside it, analyzing, worrying, replaying. But if you can learn to catch that moment, that tiny space between stimulus and response, everything changes. Because that's where your power lives, not in stopping thoughts from arriving, but in choosing whether to follow them. The spiral always starts the same way. Something happens. Someone says something. You remember something. You notice something. And a thought appears. Just one thought. Small. Innocent. Did I say something wrong? What if this goes badly? Why did they say it like that? That first thought isn't the problem. Thoughts appear constantly. That's what minds do. The problem is what happens next. Instead of noticing the thought and letting it pass, you engage it. You give it attention. You start answering it. And the moment you do, the spiral begins. One thought becomes two. Two become five. Five become 20. And before you know it, you're deep in your head, miles away from the present moment, consumed by a story that isn't even real. But it doesn't have to go that way. Because in that space between the first thought and your engagement with it, you have a choice. You can notice the thought without following it. You can see it appear and choose not to give it energy. You can let it pass like a cloud across the sky, present but not permanent, visible but not controlling. That's the skill. Not thought elimination, thought observation. And the more you practice it, the stronger you become. Until the thoughts still come, but they no longer have power, because you're no longer feeding them with your attention. Let me tell you about a woman named Isabel. Isabel was a chronic overthinker. Every night, the same pattern. She'd lie in bed, and a thought would appear. Usually something small, a conversation from the day, a task she forgot, something she needed to do tomorrow, and she'd engage it, start thinking about it. And one thought would lead to another, until she was wide awake, mind racing, replaying the day and rehearsing the next. She'd try to stop, try to force her mind to be quiet, but the harder she tried, the louder it became, because she was fighting it, and fighting gives it power. Then she learned something that changed everything. She didn't need to stop the thoughts. She just needed to stop engaging them. So she practiced. When a thought appeared, instead of diving in, she'd notice it. There's a thought about work. That's all. Just noticing. Not analyzing. Not solving. Just observing. And then she'd return her attention to her breath, to the sensation of lying in bed, to the feeling of her body relaxing. The thought would come back. She'd notice it again. There's that thought again. And she'd return to her breath. Over and over. Thought. Notice. Return. Thought. Notice. Return. At first, it felt impossible. The thoughts were so compelling. They felt urgent, important. Her mind kept saying, "But you need to think about this." And part of her believed it. But she kept practicing, kept noticing, kept returning. And slowly, something shifted. The thoughts still appeared, but they didn't pull her in. They'd arrive, she'd notice them, and they'd fade, like waves that reach the shore and then recede. She was no longer drowning in them. She was watching them from the beach, And that distance changed everything. She started sleeping again, not because the thoughts stopped coming, but because they stopped controlling her. Breaking the spiral before it starts requires awareness. You have to catch the first thought, the trigger, the moment when the pattern usually begins. And the only way to catch it is to know what you're looking for. So you study your patterns. You notice the thoughts that typically start the spiral. For some people, it's what if. For others, it's why did they? For others, it's I should have. These are the gateway thoughts, the ones that, when followed, lead you deep into overthinking. Once you know your triggers, you can recognize them faster. You see the thought appear and think, there it is. That's the one that usually takes me down the rabbit hole. And instead of following it, you pause, you breathe, you choose differently. Here's a technique that works. Label the thought. When you notice the spiral starting, say to yourself, this is overthinking, or this is worry, or this is rumination. The label creates distance. It reminds you that the thought is not truth. It's just mental activity. And mental activity doesn't require your participation. You can watch it without joining it. The labeling also engages the prefrontal cortex, the rational part of your brain, which helps calm the amygdala, the emotional part. It's like putting a name to a feeling. The moment you name it, you have some power over it. It's no longer this overwhelming, nameless force. It's just worry, just overthinking, just a thought. Another way to break the spiral is to ask yourself, is this thought useful right now? Not is it true, not is it important, but is it useful? Is thinking about this helping me in this moment? If the answer is no, you let it go, not by suppressing it, but by redirecting your attention. You consciously choose to focus on something else, your breath, the sounds around you, the feeling of your feet on the ground. You're not running from the thought. You're just choosing not to give it your energy, because energy is limited. And every moment you spend on unproductive thinking is a moment you're not spending on something that actually serves you. The spiral also breaks when you question the story your mind is telling. Your mind loves stories. It creates narratives to make sense of things. But most of those narratives are fiction. Someone doesn't text you back, and your mind creates a story. They're ignoring me. They're angry. I did something wrong. But you don't actually know that. That's just the story. The truth might be completely different. Maybe they're busy. Maybe they didn't see the message. Maybe they're dealing with something that has nothing to do with you. When you catch yourself in a story, stop and ask, do I know this is true? Usually, the answer is no. You're assuming, interpreting, filling in blanks with worst-case scenarios. And the moment you see that, the story loses its grip, because you realize it's not truth. It's just your mind doing what minds do, creating narratives from incomplete information. Here's a powerful practice, the 5-minute rule. When a thought triggers overthinking, give yourself 5 minutes to think about it. Set a timer. Think about it fully for those 5 minutes. Analyze it. Worry about it. Do whatever your mind wants to do. But when the timer goes off, you stop. You've given the thought its time. Now you move on. This works because it satisfies the mind's need to process without letting it spiral endlessly. The mind feels heard, and once it's been heard, it's often willing to let go. The key is actually stopping when the timer goes off, not negotiating, not giving it just a few more minutes. You stop, and you redirect your attention to something else, to action, to presence, to life. Breaking the spiral also means recognizing when thinking has become a form of avoidance. Sometimes overthinking is just a way to avoid doing something. You need to have a difficult conversation, but instead of having it, you think about it. You need to make a decision, but instead of deciding, you analyze every option endlessly. You need to take action, but instead of acting, you prepare. Thinking feels productive. It feels like you're doing something. But it's not action. It's avoidance disguised as preparation. And the longer you think, the more anxious you become. Because deep down, you know you're stalling. So you ask yourself, am I thinking or am I avoiding? And if the answer is avoiding, you take the smallest possible action. You send the message. You make the call. You start the task. Not perfectly, just started. Because action, even imperfect action, breaks the spiral faster than any amount of thinking. The truth is, most of what you overthink never happens. Most of your worries don't come true. Most of your worst-case scenarios remain imaginary. But even knowing that, the mind keeps worrying. Because the mind doesn't care about statistics. It cares about survival. And to the primitive brain, worry feels like preparation, like vigilance, like keeping you safe. But it's not. It's just keeping you stuck. So you interrupt it, gently, firmly, with awareness. You see the spiral starting, and you choose differently. You choose presence over pattern, awareness over autopilot, freedom over familiarity. And little by little, the spirals lose their power. They still start, but they don't finish. Because you're no longer feeding them. You're choosing something else, something real, something here, something now. Let's move forward. Chapter 7. The body knows before the mind does. Your body has been trying to tell you something for a long time, but you've been too busy thinking to listen. You feel tension in your shoulders, tightness in your chest, heaviness in your stomach, shallowness in your breath. These aren't random sensations. They're messages. Your body is communicating what your mind refuses to acknowledge. That you're stressed, that you're overwhelmed, that you're holding on to something you need to release. But instead of listening, you override it. You push through. You tell yourself to keep going. And the body, patient but persistent, keeps trying to tell you. Louder each time. Overthinking isn't just mental, it's physical. When your mind races, your body responds. Your nervous system activates. Your heart rate increases. Your muscles tense. Stress hormones flood your bloodstream. And if this happens constantly, if you're living in your head day after day, your body never gets to rest. It's in a perpetual state of low-level emergency. And over time, that takes a toll. Chronic pain, digestive issues, fatigue, insomnia, headaches, anxiety that feels like it lives in your chest. These aren't separate problems. They're symptoms of the same thing, a mind that won't stop and a body that's bearing the cost. But here's what most people don't realize. The body also holds the solution. Because the body, unlike the mind, is always in the present moment. It doesn't ruminate about the past or worry about the future. It just feels, senses, exists. And when you return your attention to your body, you automatically return to the present. You interrupt the thought spiral. You ground yourself in something real, something immediate, something that's actually happening right now. That's why somatic practices, practices that involve the body, are so powerful for overthinkers. They pull you out of your head and into your experience, out of thought and into sensation, out of story and into reality. Let me tell you about a man named Marcus. Marcus lived entirely in his head. He thought about everything, analyzed everything, worried about everything, and he had no idea how much it was affecting his body. Until one day, during a massage, the therapist pressed on a spot in his shoulder and he felt something release. Not just tension, emotion, sadness he didn't even know he was carrying. He started crying, right there on the massage table, surprised, confused. And the therapist said, "Your body holds what your mind tries to forget." That moment changed Marcus because he realized he'd been storing everything, every stress, every worry, every unprocessed emotion in his body, and his body was exhausted. He started paying attention to the tension in his jaw when he was stressed, to the tightness in his chest when he was anxious, to the knot in his stomach when he was worried. These sensations had been there all along, but he'd been ignoring them, too focused on his thoughts to notice what his body was trying to tell him. So he learned to listen. When he felt tension, instead of ignoring it, he paused. He breathed into it. He asked, "What is this? What am I holding?" And often the answer would come, not as a thought, but as a knowing, a release, a softening. His body was showing him what his mind couldn't articulate. And when he listened, when he honored what his body was saying, the overthinking lessened, because he was addressing the root, not just the symptoms. Your body knows before your mind does. It feels the stress before you consciously register it. It tenses before you realize you're anxious. It signals discomfort before you acknowledge you're in the wrong situation. That's why people say, "I had a gut feeling," because the body speaks in sensations, not words. And if you're not paying attention to those sensations, you miss the message. You override your instincts. You rationalize. You think your way past what your body is trying to tell you. And then you wonder why you feel so disconnected, so out of touch with yourself. It's because you've been living in your head, and your head, brilliant as it is, doesn't have all the answers. Some answers live in the body, in the tightness that says no, in the openness that says yes, in the heaviness that says rest, in the lightness that says go. Here's a practice: body scanning. It's simple but profound. You sit or lie down, close your eyes, and you bring your attention to your body, starting at the top of your head, noticing any sensations, any tension, any tightness, then slowly moving down. Your face, your jaw, your neck, your shoulders, your chest, your stomach, your arms, your legs. You're not trying to change anything, just noticing. Where's their tension? Where is their ease? What is your body holding? This practice does two things. First, it interrupts overthinking. You can't be fully in your head and fully in your body at the same time. So by bringing attention to your body, you automatically pull attention away from your thoughts. Second, it gives you information. Your body is always communicating, but you have to listen. And the body scan is a way of listening, of checking in, of asking, "What do you need?" Another powerful practice is conscious breathing. Not just any breathing, conscious breathing. Slow, deep, intentional. In through the nose for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Out through the mouth for 6. This activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the part of your nervous system responsible for rest and relaxation. It tells your body, "We're safe. We can relax." And when your body relaxes, your mind follows. You can't think your way to calm. but you can breathe your way there. Because the breath is the bridge between body and mind. It's the one automatic function you can also control. And when you control it consciously, you signal to your entire system that you're okay, that you're here, that you're present. Movement also helps. When you're stuck in your head, move your body. Walk, stretch, dance, shake. Movement releases stuck energy. It shifts your state. It reminds you that you're not just a brain. You're a whole organism. And that organism functions best when it moves, when it breathes, when it feels. Overthinkers often live from the neck up, all mental, all cerebral. And they forget they have a body until the body forces them to remember through pain or illness. But you don't have to wait for that. You can reconnect now through movement, through breath, through awareness. There's also something called grounding. It's a technique used to pull yourself out of your head and into the present moment through your senses. You use your 5 senses to anchor yourself in reality. You notice 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. This practice interrupts rumination instantly because you can't be lost in thought and fully engaged with your senses at the same time. Your senses are immediate. They're here, now. And when you tune into them, you return to the present. You leave the mental loop and enter the sensory experience. And in that experience, there's no room for overthinking, just awareness, just presence, just being. Your body also needs rest, real rest. Not just sleep, but rest. Time when you're not productive, not achieving, not even thinking, just being. Most overthinkers are terrified of rest because rest feels like inactivity, and inactivity feels like wasting time. But rest isn't wasted time. It's when your body integrates, when your nervous system recalibrates, when your mind finally gets to stop. And when you rest, truly rest, you give your system permission to heal, to release, to reset. That's why people who never rest are always on edge, always anxious, always overthinking, because their system never gets the downtime it needs to function properly. The body knows. It knows when you're out of alignment, when you're in the wrong relationship, when you're doing work that doesn't fulfill you, when you're ignoring something important. It tells you through sensations, through discomfort, through tension. And if you keep ignoring it, the whispers become screams. The tightness becomes pain. The fatigue becomes illness. Your body will keep sending the message until you listen. So listen now, while it's still a whisper, before it has to shout. Because the body is wise. It doesn't lie. It doesn't rationalize. It just feels. And in that feeling, there's truth. Truth your mind might be avoiding, but your body can't. It holds everything. Every emotion you've suppressed. Every word you didn't say. Every boundary you didn't set. And it's asking you, gently, persistently, to pay attention, to come home, to reconnect, to remember that you're not just a thinker. You're a feeler, a liver, a being, and being requires presence, in the body, in the moment, in the truth of what is. Let's continue. Chapter 8, The Art of Doing Nothing. There's a skill most people never learn. It's not glamorous. It won't get you promoted. It won't impress anyone. But it might be the most important skill for mental health in the modern world. It's the art of doing nothing. Not scrolling. Not watching. Not consuming. Not distracting. Just being. Sitting. Existing. Without agenda. Without productivity. Without the need to fill every moment with something. just nothing. And for most people, especially overthinkers, nothing is terrifying. Because when you do nothing, you're left with yourself, your thoughts, your feelings, your discomfort, all the things you've been running from by staying busy, all the things you've been avoiding by thinking constantly. They all surface, and you have to face them. That's why people avoid stillness, why they keep their calendars full, why they fill every silence with noise, why they can't sit in a waiting room without pulling out their phone. Because stillness is uncomfortable. It reveals what you've been hiding from. And the mind, sensing that discomfort, does everything it can to avoid it. It says, I should be doing something. I'm wasting time. There's so much to do. But that's the addiction talking. The addiction to doing, to productivity, to constant mental stimulation. And like any addiction, it's exhausting. You can't maintain it forever. Eventually, your system demands rest. And if you won't give it rest voluntarily, it will take it from you. Through burnout, through breakdown, through illness. Doing nothing is not laziness, it's restoration. It's the space where your mind finally gets to stop, where your nervous system gets to recalibrate, where creativity gets to emerge, where clarity gets to arrive. All the things you're chasing through thinking, through doing, through achieving, they arrive naturally when you stop chasing them. But you have to be still enough to receive them. And stillness, for an overthinker, feels impossible. Because the moment you stop, the thoughts rush in. All the things you've been avoiding. All the feelings you've been suppressing. All the discomfort you've been running from. They flood in. And it's overwhelming. So you reach for your phone, turn on the TV, find something, anything, to distract you from yourself. But what if you didn't? What if you sat with it? What if you let the discomfort be there without needing to fix it or escape it? What if you trusted that the discomfort is temporary? That it will pass if you just let it? Because it will. Feelings, when allowed to be felt, don't last forever. They move through you. They rise, they peak, they fall, but only if you let them. If you keep interrupting them with distraction, they never complete. They just wait, building pressure, until the next time you're still. And then they rush in again. That's why people who never rest never feel rested, because they never allow the emotional backlog to clear. They just keep adding to it. Let me tell you about a woman named Ava. Ava was always busy, always doing. She filled every moment of her day. Work, errands, social commitments, hobbies, exercise. And when she finally had downtime, she scrolled, watched shows, listened to podcasts. She couldn't remember the last time she'd just sat, done nothing. And she thought that was normal. She thought that's what successful people did. They maximized every moment. But then she burned out. Not dramatically, just slowly, over months. She started feeling exhausted all the time, irritable, disconnected. Nothing brought her joy. She'd achieved everything she set out to do, but she felt empty, and she didn't know why. Her therapist gave her homework that sounded absurd. Sit for 10 minutes a day and do nothing. No phone, no book, no music. Just sit. Ava thought it was a waste of time, but she tried it, and the first day was excruciating. She sat on her couch, and immediately her mind started racing. All the things she needed to do, all the things she was avoiding by sitting. She felt anxious, restless, like she was wasting precious time. But she stayed. She watched the thoughts. She felt the discomfort. And slowly, something shifted. The thoughts started to slow. The restlessness started to ease. And underneath all of that, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the peace that comes from achievement. The peace that comes from just being. From not needing to be anywhere or do anything. From simply existing. She kept doing it. Every day. 10 minutes of nothing. And over time, it got easier. The thoughts still came. But they didn't pull her in. She could watch them without engaging. And in that space, she started noticing things. Insights. Realizations. Things she'd been too busy to see. She realized she'd been running. Not towards something. Away from something. Away from feelings she didn't want to feel. Away from questions she didn't want to answer. Away from herself. And the running had exhausted her. But the sitting, the doing, nothing, it brought her back. Back to herself. Back to presence. Back to peace. Doing nothing is radical in a world that glorifies busyness, that measures worth by productivity, that shames rest and celebrates exhaustion. But doing nothing is where you remember who you are beneath all the doing, beneath all the roles, beneath all the achievements. You're not your job. You're not your accomplishments. You're not your to-do list. You're the awareness that exists before and after all of that. And that awareness doesn't need to do anything to be valuable. It already is. It's the ground of your being, the stillness beneath the noise, the peace beneath the chaos. And you can only access it by stopping, by doing nothing, by just being. Here's a practice. Schedule nothing. Actually put it in your calendar. 30 minutes, an hour, a morning, whatever feels possible. And during that time, you do nothing. You don't plan. You don't think. You don't solve. You just sit, or lie, or stare out the window. You let yourself be bored. Let yourself be still. Let yourself be uncomfortable. And you don't rescue yourself from it. You don't reach for distraction. You just stay. And in that staying, something heals. Not because you're doing anything, but because you're finally allowing yourself to stop. Doing nothing also means letting go of the need to optimize every moment, to make everything productive, to turn every experience into a lesson, or a post, or a story. Sometimes, a moment is just a moment. It doesn't need to be captured. It doesn't need to be analyzed. It doesn't need to mean anything. It just needs to be experienced. And then released. That's freedom. Not the accumulation of experiences, but the ability to be fully present in them without needing to own them or document them or make them more than they are. Just experiencing and then letting go. The art of doing nothing is the art of being, and being is the opposite of overthinking. Overthinking is always about something, some problem, some worry, some analysis, but being is about nothing. Just presence, just awareness, just the simple fact of existing. And when you remember how to be, when you remember that you don't need to think or do or achieve to be worthy of existence, everything changes. The pressure lifts. The anxiety eases. The exhaustion fades. Because you're no longer carrying the weight of constant doing. You're allowing yourself to rest, to be held, to exist without justification. And that, more than any amount of thinking, is what brings peace. Let's move forward. Chapter 9. Retraining your mind. Your mind is not your enemy, but it has been trained to behave like one, trained by years of anxiety, trained by a culture that rewards worry and punishes rest, trained by experiences that taught you to be vigilant, to anticipate threats, to never let your guard down. And now it runs on autopilot. Overthinking, catastrophizing, ruminating, not because it wants to hurt you, but because it's trying to protect you, using strategies that once worked but now only create suffering. So the solution isn't to fight your mind, it's to retrain it, to teach it new patterns, new responses, new ways of being. And that training, like any training, requires patience, repetition, and compassion. Retraining your mind starts with awareness. You have to see the patterns before you can change them. So you pay attention. When does the overthinking start? What triggers it? What thoughts typically lead to spirals? What situations make you anxious? You don't judge these patterns. You just observe them, like a scientist studying data, curious, detached. Because the moment you see the pattern clearly, it loses some of its power. It's no longer invisible, no longer automatic. It's just a habit, and habits can be changed. The next step is interruption. When you notice the pattern starting, you interrupt it. Not forcefully, not violently, just gently. You notice the thought and choose not to follow it. You feel the anxiety rising and choose to breathe instead of spiral. You catch yourself catastrophizing and choose to question the story instead of believe it. Each interruption is a small act of rebellion against the old pattern. Each time you choose differently, you weaken the old neural pathway and strengthen a new one. It's not dramatic. It's not instant. But it's cumulative. And over time, the old pattern loses its grip. Then comes redirection. Instead of just stopping the old thought, you redirect your attention to something else. To your breath. To your body. To something in the present moment. This gives your mind something to do. Because the mind doesn't like emptiness. If you just try to stop thinking without giving it something else to focus on, it will fill the void with more thinking. But if you redirect it, if you give it a new focus, it follows. You're not suppressing. You're guiding. You're showing your mind a new way. And the more you practice redirection, the easier it becomes. Until it's automatic. Until presence becomes your default instead of overthinking. Retraining also requires repetition. You can't do this once and expect everything to change. The old patterns have been reinforced thousands of times, so the new patterns need repetition too. Every time you notice and interrupt and redirect, you're practicing, you're retraining. And at first, it feels effortful, unnatural, like learning any new skill. But with practice, it gets easier. Until one day, you notice the thought, and you automatically let it pass. You feel the anxiety, and you automatically breathe. You catch the spiral, and you automatically return to the present. It's no longer something you have to remember to do. It's just what you do. That's mastery, not perfection, but fluency. Let me tell you about a man named Owen. Owen had been an overthinker his entire life. He'd tried everything: therapy, medication, self-help books. Some things helped a little, but nothing truly changed the pattern. Until he learned about neuroplasticity, the idea that the brain can change, that new patterns can be formed, and old ones can be weakened. That gave him hope, because it meant he wasn't stuck. His brain wasn't broken. It was just trained in a certain way, and it could be retrained. So he started practicing. Not perfectly, not consistently at first, but he tried. Every time he noticed overthinking, he labeled it. This is rumination. Then he took 3 conscious breaths. Then he brought his attention to something in the present moment, a sound, a sensation, something real. At first, nothing seemed to change. He'd practiced for days, and the overthinking was still there, just as strong, just as consuming. But he kept going. because he understood it was training, and training takes time. Weeks passed, then months, and slowly he started noticing something. The spirals were shorter. They still started, but he'd catch them faster, and once he caught them, he could redirect. The thoughts still came, but they didn't pull him in as deeply. He could watch them without drowning in them. And that was progress. Not the absence of overthinking, but the ability to not be controlled by it. That was freedom. After 6 months, Owen barely recognized his mental landscape. The overthinking hadn't disappeared, but it no longer dominated his life. He could think when thinking was useful, and rest when it wasn't. He could feel anxious without spiraling. He could face uncertainty without catastrophizing. His mind had learned new patterns, and those patterns felt natural now, not forced, not effortful, just the new normal. That's what retraining does. It doesn't erase the old, but it creates the new, and the new, with enough repetition, becomes stronger than the old. Retraining your mind also means changing the stories you tell yourself. Because your mind doesn't just think, it narrates. It creates a story about who you are and what's possible for you. And if that story is, I'm an overthinker, I've always been this way, I can't change, then you won't. Because you'll live according to the story. But if you change the story, if you start saying, I'm learning to manage my thoughts, I'm retraining my mind, I'm capable of change, then you open the door to transformation. The story you tell yourself becomes the reality you live. So tell a better story. Another part of retraining is self-compassion, because change is hard. You're going to slip. You're going to forget. You're going to spiral even after weeks of progress. And when that happens, you don't punish yourself. You don't say, see, nothing works, I'm hopeless. You say, I'm human. I slipped. That's okay. I'll try again. Because self-compassion is what allows you to keep going. Shame makes you quit. Compassion makes you resilient. And resilience is what carries you through the training, through the days when it feels impossible, through the moments when you want to give up. Compassion reminds you that you're doing hard work, and hard work deserves kindness, not criticism. You also retrain your mind by what you expose it to. If you're constantly consuming news, social media, drama, negativity, your mind learns that the world is dangerous, that people are threats, that you need to be vigilant. But if you curate what you consume, if you expose yourself to beauty, to wisdom, to calm, your mind learns a different story. It learns that the world is also safe, that people are also kind, that life is also beautiful. Your environment shapes your mind, so shape it intentionally. Choose what you watch, what you read, what you listen to, who you spend time with, because all of it is training your brain, either toward anxiety or toward peace. You get to choose. Finally, retraining your mind means celebrating small wins. Every time you interrupt a thought spiral, that's a win. Every time you choose presence over rumination, that's a win. Every time you redirect your attention, that's a win. These moments feel small, insignificant, but they're not. They're the building blocks of transformation. And when you acknowledge them, when you celebrate them, you reinforce the new pattern. You tell your brain, yes, this is good. Let's do more of this. And your brain listens. It adapts. It learns. And slowly, imperceptibly, you become someone different. Not because you forced yourself to change, but because you trained yourself, gently consistently, compassionately into a new way of being. Let's continue. Chapter 10. Living Beyond Thought. There's a version of you that exists beyond thought, beyond analysis, beyond the constant mental narration. A version that simply experiences life without needing to interpret it, that feels without needing to explain, that exists without needing to justify. Most people never meet this version of themselves. They're so identified with their thoughts that they believe that's all they are. But thoughts are just one layer of consciousness. Beneath them is something deeper, something quieter, something that has been there all along, waiting to be remembered. That's your true self, not the thinker, but the awareness that watches the thinker. And when you learn to live from that place, everything changes. Living beyond thought doesn't mean you stop thinking. It means thinking stops being your primary mode of existence. You think when you need to, when there's a problem to solve, a decision to make, a concept to understand. But the rest of the time, you're just present, experiencing, sensing, being. You're in your body, not your head. In the moment, not the story. In the silence, not the noise. And from that place, life feels different, lighter, more immediate, more alive. Because you're no longer filtering everything through thought. You're experiencing it directly. And direct experience is where life actually happens. The shift from living in thought to living in presence is subtle but profound. It's not something you achieve. It's something you remember, because you've been present before, as a child, before you learn to overthink, before you develop the habit of constant mental commentary. You experience life without the filter, without the analysis, without the story. You just played, laughed, cried, felt, and life was vivid, immediate, full. That capacity is still there. It never left. It just got buried under years of thinking. And now you're uncovering it, not by adding something new, but by removing what's been covering it, removing the layers of thought that separate you from direct experience. Let me tell you about a moment I had. I was walking in a park. And for once, I wasn't thinking. I wasn't planning. I wasn't replaying. I was just walking. And I noticed the light, the way it filtered through the trees, the way it made everything glow. And I stopped, not to take a picture, not to capture the moment, just to be in it. And for those few seconds, there was no me, no separation between the observer and the observed, just experiencing, just presence. And in that moment, I felt something I'd been searching for my whole life: peace. Not the peace that comes from solving problems, but the peace that comes from being fully here, fully alive, fully awake. That's what living beyond thought feels like. Not transcendent, just present. And presence, it turns out, is enough. Living beyond thought also means letting go of the need to understand everything. The mind wants explanations. It wants to know why. Why did this happen? Why did they do that? Why do I feel this way? And it will think endlessly, trying to find answers. But some things don't have answers. Some things just are. And when you can accept that, when you can let the mystery be mysterious, you free yourself from the prison of needing to know. You can experience something without needing to explain it. You can feel something without needing to justify it. You can live without needing to understand every detail. And that's liberating. This doesn't mean you become passive. It doesn't mean you stop making decisions or solving problems. It means you stop overthinking. You stop using thought as a security blanket. You trust your intuition. You trust the process. You trust that you don't need to have everything figured out to move forward. You make decisions from a place of clarity, not confusion. From presence, not fear. And those decisions feel different. They feel right. Not because you've analyzed every angle, but because they're aligned with who you are, with what matters, with what's true. And alignment doesn't require thought. It requires listening to the quiet voice beneath the noise, to the knowing that exists beyond words, to the wisdom that lives in the body, in the heart, in the stillness. Living beyond thought also changes your relationships, because when you're not in your head, you're actually with people. You hear what they're saying, not what you think they're saying. You see them, not your projection of them. You connect, not just exchange words. And that connection is what people feel. They feel seen, heard, met, not because you're doing anything special, but because you're present. And presence is the greatest gift you can give. It's what everyone is searching for. Not advice, not solutions, just someone who's actually there, fully, without distraction, without agenda, just present. And when you live beyond thought, that becomes natural. Because you're no longer divided. You're whole. Here, awake. There's a practice that helps cultivate this, mindful moments. Throughout your day, pause, just for a few seconds, and be fully present. If you're drinking coffee, taste it. Really taste it. If you're walking, feel your feet on the ground. If you're talking to someone, look at them. Really look. These micro moments of presence train your brain to live outside of thought, to experience without narrating, to be without analyzing, and the more you do it, the more natural it becomes. Until presence isn't something you practice, it's just how you live. Living beyond thought is also about trusting silence. Most people are terrified of silence, both external and internal. So they fill it with noise, with conversation, with thought. But silence is not empty. It's full of awareness, full of presence, full of life. When you learn to be comfortable in silence, internal silence especially, you discover something profound. You don't need thought to exist. You don't need the constant mental commentary to know that you're here. You are here, always, beneath the thoughts, beneath the noise, beneath the story. There's a silent awareness that has been watching all along. And when you rest in that awareness, you're finally home. This is the invitation to live beyond the prison of thought, to remember that you are not your mind. You are the spacious awareness in which the mind appears. You are not the thinker. You are the consciousness that knows the thinker. And that consciousness is vast, peaceful, unchanging. It's not affected by your thoughts. It's not disturbed by your emotions. It's not threatened by uncertainty. It simply is. And when you rest in that, when you live from that place, life stops being a problem to solve and becomes an experience to have. Not always pleasant, not always easy, but always vivid, always immediate, always alive. So here's what I want you to know. You don't have to live in your head. You don't have to be controlled by thought. You don't have to overthink your way through life. There's another way, a way of being that's lighter, freer, more present, and it's available to you right now. Not someday, not when you finally figure everything out. Now, in this moment, in this breath. This is where peace lives, not in the resolution of every thought, but in the space between them. That space has always been there, quiet, patient, waiting for you to remember, and now you have. So step into it, live from it, be it, because that's who you've always been. Not the overthinking mind, but the aware presence beneath it. Welcome home.